I'm very excited and very honored to welcome to our stage David Taylor, Executive Chairman of the Board of Procter & Gamble, Joe Jimenez, P&G Director and former CEO of Novartis, Rhonda Magee, Professor of Law, Mindfulness, teacher and multiracial justice educator and activist, Terry Stone, who is Managing Partner Americas of Oliver & Wyman, and Kathy Gramling, EY Americans Consumer Industry Markets Leader. We see right now, if you read The Economist or any kind of newspaper, there is energy. The disruption in supply chain, the demand has skyrocketed, inflation, how we go from fossil fuel to a green economy. We have people that quitting. All this imbalance in people looking for jobs and then jobs looking for people and people that quit their jobs. So what kind of leadership, and I will start with you, David, is needed in the 21st century? How we go about, how we navigate?
In many ways, certainly the VUCA world's been around for many, many years. That word specifically, I can think of 10 years ago when people were talking about it. So to me, we've gone through a number of changes. What I believe the leadership skills needed in many ways are very similar. What you do and the context that you do it changes frequently. Whether it's in a recession, it's one way. In a pandemic, it was different. But if I think about what is the work of a leader, laying out a very clear vision of the outcome, desired outcome from the group, finding a way to enroll and energize a group to accomplish something that's meaningful, that makes a difference to them and ultimately serves your ultimate consumer or customer. That work to me is very similar. What has happened to me is a couple things become more important during the period we've just gone through. We're still going through it, the pandemic. When I think about things like the need to have tremendous agility and resilience, that's higher than it was probably 2-3 years ago. On the other hand, the values that guide you and the need to have trust, to me, are very clear today. They've been very clear in the past, probably more so today. In a decentralized world where you're not able to travel, your values have to be lived and trust has to be earned, and then it allows you to distribute the decision space because you trust people. But it gets down to a very clear picture of what you want, finding ways to engage and enroll. And one of the things that's worked for P&G and worked very well in the pandemic is our people have been incredibly good about stepping up and meeting the moment in a way to address consumers' needs. They've started with making sure they've stayed safe, their workplaces have stayed safe, they've made sure they've taken care of their consumer, and there's been countless examples of where they stepped up for the communities where they live and work. And I would call that they've lived their values and they've shown the trust amongst each other and more broadly across the company. And that, I think, is just a tremendous testament to the quality of people we have in this company.
We saw also the example of integrated work system and the great work you have done with EY, and that was so impressive example. And I want to go to Joe Jimenez, and I want to have the same question also to Terry Stone. And Joe, we see, and now with your experience also, deeper experience also in biotech, who is changing the world so fast, we see that increasingly we need to have broader responsibilities beyond just shareholders. In the past we were saying like we need to maximize shareholder value. Now we see that we need to maximize the value of the stakeholders, and stakeholders is consumers, customers, employees, and shareholders, and the broader society. We've heard Paul Polman to talk about net positive, not just zero, but net positive. So how we go about that, Joe? And that then goes also to Terry.
Yeah, I think when you go back and look 10 years ago, if you were leading a company, stakeholder of shareholder was kind of front and center for everybody, but that has significantly shifted, particularly now. When you just think about the pandemic and how it has changed what a leader needs to be, I think flexibility has become more important. For example, when you're talking about dealing with multiple stakeholders, as a leader, you have to be very flexible to be able to meet the needs of each of your stakeholders, while at the same time staying true north to the vision that you need to accomplish as an organization. And so with that, I think it becomes much more complicated. Another one is empathy. I think as you have many more stakeholders, you need to, as a leader, really understand the issues that those stakeholders are encountering at times of great volatility, and then determine how you as a leader can help them be the best that they can be to enable, again, your organization to meet the long-term needs. So it's very interesting what's happened, and it's expanded much, much beyond just the traditional shareholder as a stakeholder for corporations in America.
Thank you. Kathy?
Oh, sorry, Niki, I'll go.
No, go.
I would agree. Building on what David said a few moments ago, and then what Joe said, that idea of clarity of purpose and vision, I think, is really important when you're thinking multi-stakeholder. Because I think for all of us, the challenge now is a tighter and clearer linkage between purpose and profit. Like, what does that mean? Because it is a vague, complex. I think part of why we moved so tight into shareholder value 25 years ago was because managing this notion of multi-stakeholder and sort of the company, the company town and that whole idea it was complicated for people. And so I think getting clarity on that, that real intent and the connection between purpose and profit is important. I also think, as I was reflecting on this, one of the most relevant things for leaders to do is you have to broaden and lengthen your field of vision. It's this idea, the real challenge in this is actually a short-term versus a long-term perspective problem and a mindset of a zero-sum game. So I was drawn to an analogy or a story of something that Ford did in, I think it was 2014. And this is at a time where everybody worked sort of 7 days a week, and there were not, and if the union wasn't telling you had to do something, nobody was raising wages. And Ford raised the wages, almost doubling them, in one of his factories, and actually created the weekend and limited the days to 8 hours. And mind you, it was not all just altruistic. People beat a path to his door, and he had plenty of employees, and he was able to both deliver better value to people while simultaneously shifting how he could operate his production factories. And that's how they got to running 3 shifts and doing this and being able to really create cars that previously could never be affordable. And it created cars for the middle class. And in doing so, he actually raised the wage competitively in the sector, and it created more of a blue collar middle class. So I think sometimes the challenge to us all is, how do you reframe the situation so that you have a broader perspective of the connectivity in the ecosystem and the length of time and duration?
So it's also it's also how to frame work, because we listened to Gary Bowles before, and the future of work is like, when do we really work? Do we work when we are in our office? Do we work when we drive and we think this problem that we have to solve? What is really the boundaries of work? So yeah, Rhonda, as an expert in mindfulness, what role do leaders need to play in racial equality? And there's not only racial equality, there are many equality efforts. And how should large companies and organizations play a role outside of their workplaces? I mean, how we can drive awareness and help this, let's say, agenda of eradicating inequality?
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I love this question. Mindfulness on the one hand, driving the agenda of racial equality on the other. Part of my work for the last 20 years actually, has been about helping integrate these two conversations, mindfulness and wellness, if you will, or well-being, right? The holistic efforts that we make to center well-being as a value, as a practice in support of leadership and wise action in the world. And seeing the connections between that and all of these equity questions is really important. So what I think leaders might focus on is that, first of all, the positions that we hold when we occupy these places of opportunity and influence are powerful in ways that are obvious and non-obvious. They have contagion effects. The things that we do explicitly matter. The things that we embody implicitly are all a part of the cascading impact that managers and leaders can have. So really centering on how we actually navigate this time, building up our capacity for bearing up in times of extreme stress, volatility, uncertainty, and ambiguity. Mindfulness certainly can assist us in dealing with the changes in demographics, the changing social cultural demands and challenges that are predictable when we come together across lines of real and perceived difference. So on the one hand, I know I'm speaking about this in slightly different ways when I talk about this as essential to holistic well-being, bringing together equity on the one hand and well-being on the other through mindfulness and compassion practices. But I also noticed that when I listened to your a recipient of the Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Award, Dr. Janet Reed, some very similar aspects as to what I would offer, which is at the end of the day, we're talking about bringing a kind of publicly appropriate love and care, making the care that we feel in our hearts visible, and really being inspired to have courageous, ongoing engagements that are centered in love. And building on our own abilities by mindfulness and compassion practices, setting aside even 5 minutes a day, found time. We talked about it amongst ourselves a bit. Find those 5 minutes where you're standing in line when you didn't expect you had to, and center on feeling what's happening in your heart, feeling where you've got some unprocessed emotions that you need to kind of work through to help you be ready for the next meeting. These are the things that have very direct implications for our well-being, but they actually have ripple effects for sure on our interpersonal well-being across these lines of real and perceived difference.
Yeah, so many valid points there. And when we opened our conference, we had Sue Church talking about, the inequality, and she was mentioning that there are a lot of Hispanic and women of color that they were not taking sick leave because they were afraid of being reprimanded, of, showing that they're not good enough, so maybe lose their jobs and they don't get such a good evaluation. And then listening today, Andrew Sweeney talking about having an emotional health expert for the people. That brings, the idea and the notion of we need, as you very well said, to have our people feel like well taken care, protected, feel this kind of security so they can bring their best self. So many points of, and please, if you want to jump in and add a comment anytime, it's happy to. So I see David who wants to say something here.
Because I just build on some of the things that Rhonda said. In a volatile time or a very difficult time, and certainly the pandemic's been a very difficult time, the task for a leader is to find in a very difficult context where people are going through all kinds of health concerns, family concerns, work concerns, finding a way to unleash the human capacity you have in your company. And I think words like care really matter. Trust really matters. And separating task from outcomes. And let folks say, if we understand the outcome we want to deliver, and I trust you, and I will help you, work with you, then to me, it opens up many opportunities for how we get there. And it gives people the freedom, and frankly, we want to give them the emotional safety to take time when they need to. We know where the outcome is, but to get less individual task oriented and time oriented, more outcomes over meaningful periods of time. And one of the things that, again, I'm so impressed with how the P&G teams across the world in really difficult circumstances have handled it is they figured it out in the context they were living by giving them the decision space. We agree on the outcome, but trusting them to find a way and giving them the ability to seek sometime, whether it's mindfulness or whatever they need to use to help them cope with all the demands they have in their life. And the challenge, one of the reasons that I think the company is doing very well, P&G today, is the human capacity more and more is being unleashed constructively. Interestingly, because we have moved more of it in the hands of people closer to consumers and customers. We've gotten to a more decentralized leadership model underpinned by values, but to me, held together by the trust in the relationships that have been built over a long period of time. And the pandemic has separated us, and I would argue it's a watch out, because over time we built these relationships, and a strong relationship allows you to deal with difficult issues very constructively. And the words that you're hearing, things like the care, the support, giving people the latitude to find their path builds trust, and it builds commitment to help get to that outcome. And I think it's really important that we all recognize in this context, it's very difficult to put yourself in the shoes of someone that, in my case, somebody may be in the Philippines at a plant. What I need to do is trust the leadership there and the team there to handle it, and then be available to help with a pretty wide degree of flexibility so that they can deal with the situation they're in. And if we need to pivot, and sometimes because the situation's gotten so dire, they need to know in tough times they have extra support, not higher expectations, extra support. And when we do that, what we find is that people come through time and time again.
And David, a real life example of that is what you and John Mueller were facing this year at Procter & Gamble with the massive commodity cost increases. Remember I think it takes great leadership to be able to manage and lead an organization through a significant threat to delivering what David and the team wanted to deliver. But what David and his group did was, instead of taking the easy way out and reducing, let's say, marketing spending, which would have been bad for the brands, they set objectives in terms of cost reduction, but gave the flexibility to each and every leader to come up with their own plan to overcome some of the cost increases. So it's just one example of how leadership through super volatile times can lead to a really good outcome, as opposed to the old way of kind of prescribing what the outcome should be.
Very, very valid point, Joe. And I want to go to Kathy and ask the same question because Kathy has a lot of experience in CPG, and she also sees. So I want to ask you from two angles. One is how your personal leadership style has changed, or how you adapted in this VUCA world, and how you have seen other CPG companies or other companies leaders. I mean, what is the gamut of reacting or being flexible, I would say, not reacting?
Yeah, it's a fascination to watch. So from my perspective, I've always thought leadership is a combination, and the balance changes, as David says, somewhere between the confidence you need to be a leader and the humility that you absolutely have to be a leader. And after working with Rhonda over the last couple of days, I would add this sort of self-love or nurturing element to it that I think has become more and more clear, certainly during the pandemic, that if we don't have an ability to reflect and to take stock on the things that we need to in order to be in service to our teams, to our clients, to our people, then we can't sustain, we won't be any good. And so I reflect on my mom's one of my all-time role models, and one of her comments would always be, as I left after travel or to university or work, she'd say, "Don't forget to take care of yourself, kid." And I am often struck about how are you doing that? So how do you take care of yourself so you can be in service to others? I think the question around how have we seen the industry respond, I've actually been really proud to be part of this sector, and I've been part of it for 30 years. So I've watched companies really think about their duty of care to the globe around keeping food and essentials on the shelves. I saw a pivot to online retail that I never thought would happen in 12 months. I thought it would take us another 2 decades. I've been incredibly impressed on how the majority of manufacturers have looked at SKUs or their product lines and rationalized so they could maintain products on the shelf. They didn't take pricing during that time, which was terrible because the supply chain had already choked well before this year. And we found ourselves now in a bit of a mess, as we know, with all the trade lanes from Singapore to Los Angeles all over the place. I've actually been incredibly proud. So while different in each of their intentions, food, personal care, durables, all slightly different in their actual reaction, I've been really proud to see this sector understand their duty of care to the human race and what it means to be kind and to be as universal in their distribution as possible. I've been really impressed and quite proud to be part of this sector.
Terry, from your experience, so I'm going to ask the same question to Terry and to Rhonda. I mean, how you have been navigating through as a leader and how you adapting or being proactive, and how you see from your experience other companies do so, and where do you think is a common denominator? Is there some, let's say, conclusions or navigation kind of guidelines to go in a VUCA or in a very fast-paced changing environment?
Sure. I would echo the comments of my peers here about things such as being purposeful and intentional and trusting and empowering, and that's the only way we get anything done. And so I agree with all of that. I guess if I were to think of something additional and additive to that, there's been a common theme here. David, you started with it, which is it really that everything's changing, or is it that the same old good leadership skills need to be amped up in times of stress and maybe amped up in slightly different proportions, which I think is true. So it's always been important. What's the old adage? Sort of listen like whatever 4 times as much as you speak or something. So listening's always been important, but I think at times like this, listening even more, and both so that you can empathize with others, but also so you can learn, asking more questions. And I think one of the leadership skills that I've had to embody more of was being even more curious about things I didn't understand, and less a sense, to the point of calmness, less a sense of urgency to jump to solutions and answers when it is not clear what one should do. But the ability to take decisions in the absence of perfect information. And that seems like a paradox, but that's actually just what you have to do. And so one thing when I reflected on this was the importance of listening to the lone voice in the room or in the wilderness, the idea of not overreacting, but hearing it. And I was struck by, I don't know how many people had seen the movie The Big Short. It's based on the financial crisis, but the Christian Bale character, the guy who's like, he had seen it like 9-10 months before that the financial markets would collapse because of what was going on in his financial models, but nobody would listen to him. He was like the heretic, the crazy person. And I am struck by, while that's sort of, that is back to the past, at the time the pandemic started, this is back in late February, we had a global partner meeting scheduled. And one of my folks, I ran the healthcare team at the time, and she had done a lot of work for the CDC. We had an infectious disease expert actually on our team, and we were seeing the early things, and we were looking at our company going, no, we have got to cancel this. And everyone was waiting down to the wire because nobody could believe it was what it was, right? Because the problem with big disruption is you don't see it. And I just think back to it, like without that persistence, despite being told like, no, you're overreacting, we wouldn't have stopped it. Like we could have been the Biogen conference that became the hotspot, right? So we shut that down. But it reminds me of the importance of that. And throughout that entire period, I remember in the beginning, we were explaining to people, I hear you, but I don't think you get it. We're not shutting down for 6 weeks. This is going to be at least a year. And to be telling CEOs that in March and April of 2020, I mean, they just thought you were crazy. But we sort of stuck with it. And I think that idea to have clarity of purpose, to listen to things that might seem a little out there and then be able to assemble information, act with intent, I think is really important. And it's something that I've been trying to work more on, but I think it's really important in a world of uncertainty.
And it needs a lot of courage to take this standing, against what everybody thinks. Rhonda, some reflections?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how, I'm listening to all of you here and to the very beautiful and wow, powerful presentations and skillful examples of engaged excellence that we've heard over the last 2 days. It's striking me how this is a beautiful example of how organized networks of goodness exist. And in times like this, sometimes I think for this group, part of the messaging needs to really be about recognizing when we are reaching beyond what we're really, where our hearts and minds and our trust, our capacities to trust are. So moving at the speed of trust, allowing time to rest and repair, and normalizing that it's kind of okay to sometimes need a break, because I see a lot of overwork right now during this period, especially among high performing, leaders and their teams. And so if we can both continue to embody that spirit of high aspiration, excellence, the joy that comes from that. I know there's joy underneath that, but also be mindful of the temptation in these very challenging and times, but also times of radical new opportunities. Be mindful of the temptation to reach just beyond what might be, best for our hearts, for our bodies. Because I'm curious how you all are taking good care of yourselves during this time and where those hidden places are where you're not quite there for yourself in the way that you might be. So if we can normalize really staying close to those values of, yes, excellence, high aspiration and achievement, but bringing a bit more to the fore, that normalization that we're just soft-bellied, carbon-based human beings struggling in a time of change. And we're gonna sometimes need a little bit extra support, and it's 100% okay to give that to ourselves and to make sure that we're normalizing that as wise and profound leadership in these moments too. We need sometimes to pause. We need to be able to see more clearly what's going on. And I think mindfulness.
Yeah. Thank you, Rhonda. Now I want to go to Joe and ask him what kind of leadership is needed to drive results. And with your experience with Novartis and your current work with biotech, I'm sure that there are a lot of ethical dilemmas or consideration, especially with the pace of change in biotech. So, and you mentioned the true north before. So how you keep your true north when you have all these biotech challenges, not to mention, and I will get there in a moment, also the planet considerations?
Yes, it's a good question. And Niki, I think when you're in biotech or pharmaceuticals, there are a lot of twists and turns because this is biology and we don't always know where it's going to end up if you're developing a new drug for a particular disease. So the first and most important trait of a leader, I think, in that environment is to have steadfast conviction that you know what you want to accomplish. You've got a disease that you need to interrupt, and you must continue to find ways to do if there the first is to be flexible enough to adapt to the environment. For example, who would have thought that we would be hiring people remotely without meeting them in person? 3 years ago, I would have never done that. But I started a biotech venture firm right at the beginning of the shutdown. So I hired my entire team without meeting them. And I think if you go back and you think about ever possibly doing that in the old world, we would have never done it. But you do it because you have to do it, because your whole business will stop if you don't take certain action. So it's that steadfast conviction, I think, knowing where you're going with the flexibility and agility to be able to move in a highly volatile world.
Joe, go ahead.
No, go, Kathy.
Joe, I was going to say, I found, it's crazy, but I actually have found this time to be more intimate. You were talking about hiring people. We've done the same, but I will tell you, with client, I've built relationships totally virtually, which I never would have thought. I'm sure my children, of course, think it's totally normal. Why wouldn't they? They're young, but I've built, I think, more authentic, more quickly. I'm in my she shed right now, and you can see my life and my books and, my family and my photos and my dogs come through. And I think there's something more real in some ways that this has allowed us to find some authenticity, because you are who you are. You are really showing up every day.
Kathy, I think you're right, but would we ever have thought that 3 years ago? We would have never, so it's also a huge lesson in how something that is radically volatile and crazy can teach you new things.
That's absolutely right.
Building on that point, Joe, because that's actually, Kathy, before you said that, that's where I was going on that idea of seeing possibility. When I reflect, it would be a shame if we can't find ways to push ourselves to see more possibility until you're like literally back to the wall. When I look back on the amount of energy that my clients, that all large and small companies have put on inclusion and diversity or women in the workforce over the last decades, right? Overnight, we went, like, people wanted more flexibility, being remote, all these things. But it was like we couldn't imagine it. Like, Kathy, in our business, like, we'd always talk about it. How do we get women to make to partner? But you'd have to stick around, and there's travel, and you have kids, and it's really hard. And it was like we would think about all the workarounds, but we wouldn't just go, well, maybe we just shouldn't travel to clients so much. We came up with carbon neutral strategies to do offsets. How about we just don't get on airplanes as much? How about we reimagine something that boldly? Because think of how much lost capacity there's been in these women who dropped out. And we now look at this and go, look, anything is possible. So I am hopeful that we take lessons from this, but it is really around seeing possibilities before you get your back to the wall. But I'm hoping we can learn from that and get more.
Yeah.
I very much think that what you said is very, very true. If we again go back, if we believe that a big part of leadership is unleashing the human potential in our organization, and I believe it really is. Terry, what you said, and Kathy and Rhonda, all those comments are about doing that. It's finding ways we didn't imagine. Joe, to your point, we didn't imagine, but part of that is our narrow field of vision. We've gotten much, much wider. It's interesting, though, as we look at around the world, almost all these things have been experienced somewhere. There have been lockdowns because of other reasons, and groups had to cope. But it's interesting, we don't take it into, in many cases, into the U.S., into our more established structured system until we had to. And the pandemic did force us to. The other thing that I think has been interesting about this, and it's something I deeply believe in, the leaders that, to me, I look up to and that I think are most effective, especially in times of a lot of change, are leaders that don't worry about being personally right, but seeing that the right thing gets done. Because what that then does is you can access everybody's skills and knowledge, because it doesn't matter who is right. It matters that we collectively do the right thing. And the leadership model of the smart person that stands in the middle and owns the room, to me, is grossly outdated in today's world. Today, it's about literally unleashing people and finding ways to increase the collective capacity of an organization to do the right thing. That includes serving the broader group of stakeholders that we talked earlier, delivering for your investors for sure, but taking care of your employees, treating your consumers as people, not just consumers. They're people with families and feelings and lives. And you go through all this and the planet's resources. And all these things have come on the table. And just think, if we could access the experience and knowledge of every employee and had that in front of us to make decisions, how much better we would be. And it's one of the reasons why the whole act of having an inclusive environment and having diverse teams, it is the great multiplier, because you have people that have a broader set of experiences. And to the extent we're willing not to be right, but see if we can tap into the collective intellect, you get to the fact that none of us are smarter than all of us. And if we can find the smart way to unleash that, good things happen. The pandemic forced us. We could not cope with the normal system would not allow us to run. We were in many cases couldn't go to our offices, but yet we managed. And to me, I think it was just an accelerated learning experience. And if anything, it's a fabulous lesson in humility for all of us. We didn't anticipate it, but we've learned together. And now we'll go from here, to me, much smarter and much more open as leaders.
Yeah. I love this part of the conversation. It's so energizing. I really appreciate, Kathy, you just naming that. Yeah, we are a little bit more intimate, a little bit more real, authentic, you might say. And I'll say that, some of the research has shown that women of color, for example, are particularly, in some ways, coming out of a shell or finding some extra life for work, partly because we've been allowed this margin around our day to get in, do the work that we know how to do, but not have to, navigate in through and around the world that oftentimes meets us with microaggressions, meets us with disrespect. We handle that stuff and we show up, but we've often shown up after having taken a few more slings and arrows than is obvious. And just having this space, right, within which to do the work that we know how to do, but a little bit less of the extra, what I sometimes with my partner call nonsensory, the extra nonsense of just like, navigating a world where to see a person who looks like me show up in a courtroom or in a leadership place, and having to just deal with that. Here, so using this technology and the adaptations that the pandemic required has opened up a little bit more space for women of color in particular, who, yes, as was mentioned, have been disproportionately affected on the one hand, but also have had this less security, job security, less confidence in being able to say, hey, I need a little bit more support here. We are benefiting from these adaptations, the online availability, but I do think keeping that ear open, keeping the lines of communication open. I love the way, David, you mentioned this, the communication and relationships as such an important part of the secret sauce of P&G. Because relationship and trust building is never easy. And across these categories of difference, it's more challenging than we realize sometimes, because again, we show up and make it look easy. Behind the scenes, it's not as easy. So if we can keep that ear open and keep opening up that sense that, we, as you mentioned, all the evidence shows that we're so much stronger together than separate. But we know that we live in a world where people are cultivating the idea that we can't work together, that we have these differences, we should be polarized. So I think just being mindful that things are challenging outside that we're trying to bear up against, and we need each other, and we need each other's kind of caring made visible. Again, as I hate to say that again, but it's true, I think. We need that more than we realize during these times, and the benefits are much greater than we can realize sometimes.
And Rhonda, I think the key as leaders is going to be, how do we maintain that when more and more people go back to the office, right? Remote work has become a great equalizer, and we need to not lose that as we move into a world where we are back at work.
Yeah. Joe, building one more thought on that is something that we're advising clients on, but we worry about is not only losing it, but what if we actually backslide? Because what if the people who choose the flexibility, so it's one thing when we're all home or all in the office, whether you want to be there or not, but when some are present and some are virtual, what happens? If the people who choose the flexibility, some of them are people we've been struggling to keep in the workforce. So what happens? Do we actually backslide more? I think leaders being very intentional in watching that, I think matters. I also think whatever plans any of us have right now for what does hybrid work look like? What is purposeful togetherness? How's this going to work? They're categorically not right, but they're a good place to start. And we have to listen to our people and learn and adapt, right? I mean, the biggest disconnect I see is companies go, yeah, everyone did it remote. Then suddenly we're doing surveys between leaders and teams and staff. And the leaders want people back in a lot more and the staff want flexibility. And then when we start talking about it, they're like, yeah, well, we'll give them flexibility. Pick your 2.5 days a week. And I'm like, no, they want to they'll come in 4 days sometimes, no days another. They want to go and stay with their parents for a week, not take PTO and have dinner with them at night, but work and be able to go to a doctor's appointment. Like, that's what people now want. And we got to find that thing. And we won't get it right the first time, but if we focus on the people, as we've all been saying, there is a path to something great.
Terry, you mentioned also before, like all these changes that the pandemic brought had a positive effect on the climate. And climate is something that is of tremendous importance, as all the speakers from Sue Olchers to Paul Polman mentioned. And this morning, watching Mark Pritchard's talk, only by the campaign of not washing with hot water but just cold is taking away like 1 million cars. I mean, the numbers are staggering. So I want to start with David. So what kind of leadership is needed? How did you go on driving this environmental change and being a force for good? So what is the thinking behind this kind of leadership?
I think it goes back to what we talked earlier, which is we've believed for a long, long time, and this didn't get just in vogue recently at this company, that we ought to be a group that serves the broader group of stakeholders. So sustainability isn't something we just started the last few years, and the same is true in equality and inclusion. These have been built into the culture for a long time. We talk about wanting to build into our innovation programs sustainable products and packages, and into our communication programs ways to help consumers adopt more responsible practices. And the fact that we want to own the responsibility means that we work with the designers, our suppliers, all the way through to communicating to consumers in ways that meet them wherever they are, when and where they're receptive to the message, with a way to have a much more responsible footprint. And one example certainly is the example that was cited earlier on laundry. You know, when you wash with cold water, the biggest impact of washing your clothes is not the product or the package, it's the heating the hot water, the energy that's used. So if we can design formulas that can meet the consumer's needs on cleaning and stain removal and other benefits, but that don't require hot water, then you have a technical opportunity to make a difference. But it's only if consumers change their behavior, and it's hard to change somebody's behavior. So we have to find then the right communication. You don't lecture consumers, you try to help them do what's right. And to me, it's been a challenge. We have many campaigns across a number of brands that are addressing both product, package, as well as what's called Scope 3, what happens outside our walls. Because I think we will do tremendous progress. We'll lead the progress inside our walls with our supply chain, with our products and package. We'll work with our suppliers. The bigger challenge is going to be for us, and the biggest footprint we have by far is Scope 3, is product usage. And so we have to find a way to design out more plastic. We have to design out many of the issues that frankly the consumer then is left with. End of life. You know, how do you have a system that is truly circular, scalable, and to me one that meets the consumer's needs? Because if it doesn't meet his or her need, it won't be followed. Especially true in this country. You have a little more probably environmentally conscious culture in Europe, but even things that are recyclable today, the vast majority aren't recycled. So, you know, you could have everything be recyclable tomorrow and we wouldn't solve our problem, which is why we've got to own the outcome, which is until we get to a meaningful difference, we're not done. And that's why I think Mark's examples were powerful, which is they're examples of where the product has been changed, the package has been changed, and we've worked with the consumer to try to have a delightful experience that meets his or her needs in a responsible way, that values the world's resources, the earth, in a very different way. And that's something that is going to be ongoing, much like the work that we've done in social sustainability. We've gone outside our walls with messaging. We've tried to live our values not only inside our walls. Today, Joe knows, our board is 50-50 men, women, a third multicultural. We want, as best we can, our board, our leadership team, and our company to reflect the consumers we serve. It has us then do a much better job understanding, being empathetic, and then able to serve our consumers. These are choices the company's made over time, and we've tried to accelerate them as we learn more and more how to address these challenges. We're in a learning mode on these. I don't think anybody's figured it out, but it's one that we've tapped into the collective intellect within our company. But now we've done, I think, more and more outside the company to leverage the amazing resources that are available to us on both environmental and social sustainability. It's a journey, but it's a journey the company has embraced and moving, and our people are doing a terrific job challenging us. And I'd give credit to a number of people that have challenged me and the leadership team. We need to move faster. A company like P&G needs to be on the front of this, not waiting for regulatory approval. We ought to be doing what's right because we know it's right. Living the values in a way that's rewarding to our shareholders, but also the broader stakeholder community.
I see Joyce nodding, so any comments there?
No, I think David said it, and being able to watch the P&G sustainability effort as a board member and participate in the net zero carbon emission goal that the company has stated, I keep coming back to steadfast conviction as one of the leadership traits that is absolutely necessary when you're dealing with environmental issues, because sometimes you're going to incur higher costs, sometimes not, not everybody's going to line up behind it, and you have to have that conviction. And we saw that from David and from John and the rest of the P&G leadership team, which is why I think they've made so much progress on sustainability.
Yeah, so I hope I have a few more minutes to summarize. From what I have heard, I'll try to make a summary, and if this is not reflects what we have discussed, you can jump in. So leadership, we need the leadership in the workplace, and I would start with what Joe said, fast conviction. So, and this is built with having purpose, values, and principles. And as said before, this is all is orchestrated and is based through trust. So you need to trust people, you need to build an environment of inclusiveness, an environment that people deliver, although you have not hired them through a rigorous process, but remotely, and Joe mentioned before, and through hierarchies that they are not as rigid and stiff, but because there is trust, you can work remotely, you can be in Cincinnati and trust that the factory worker will do the best or what is needed without having someone, overlooking or looking over his shoulder. And this is kind of an environment and a culture of, as David said, we all learning together. We all learning together.
One quick comment. One is just to thank all the folks in the P&G alumni. One of the special things about this company, and one of the reasons I think all of us are willing to speak, but I believe over the last 2 days, you've had 4 P&G CEOs speak, you had some board members speak, and then many other distinguished experts from a variety of different companies. A special part about this is the purpose, values, and principles that cause to all of us, those that are active employees, and those of you that work for P&G for a while, then chose some other career paths, but you still come back, is because there is something special that brings us all together. I know John Pepper spoke, because in many ways he's the walking PVP, is that it's a special thing, and I think it's one we ought to cherish, which is the relationships we form in the company then can transcend lots of different experiences over life, but we come back for more because we value those. And to me, it's one of the reasons why I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak with you. Wish it was in person, because it's wonderful to reconnect with people that you've worked with and truly value. And it's a wonderful network for us to learn together on challenging issues we all face. And we talked many of those today, but to the broader network of the alumni team, I very much appreciate what you do. And it's one of the, again, special things about our company. And I also think it's wonderful to have a chance to learn with Kathy and Terry and Rhonda and Joe and all the other people that spoke. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And if there is any final comment from any of you, you know, I see the clock is already 0:00 long time, but you know, I'm gonna be a little bit of, we have the stage and take a few more minutes. Why not? Can we do that? Yeah. No? I see Ed Hazia looking me very angry. So, well, a few closing comments before we say goodbye.
Well, the one thing I would add, if I could just jump in to say, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me to join with you all. As you know, I'm not a P&G alum, but I now feel like I'm an honorary member of your community.
Adopted you.
Yeah, please, thank you. And it's a mutual adoption society, so thank you so much. You know, we've learned during this time, we're radically interconnected. Nothing is permanent. And our lives actually all already do matter, and we all inherently belong here. So if we can live in a way, love the emphasis on the values that are so clearly a part of this community, those values can be informed and, you know, kind of given a little bit of extra oomph to amplify the positives around connecting across difference, because we're at a time where that's needing some PR right now. So if we can amplify what we know about the value of connecting across difference, of making the most of the moments that we have, because we do not have, you know, forever. I think that this kind of what you all are doing can be inspiring well beyond this circle, and it's my hope that it will. I trust that it will be. So thank you so much.
You know, I might just sort of add to where Rhonda is, guys. You asked a question, Niki, about other companies in the sector. And I don't know if, as alums, you have a real understanding about the foundation you get at P&G. So we always say no one ever got fired for hiring one of the strategy houses. No one could ever take away what it is to be classically trained and oriented to what purpose is when you have time at P&G. And you actually show up differently. When I work with all sorts of clients and I find all sorts of P&G alum around, and you are different. You have a very different sense of orientation to yourselves, to your purpose, to your duty, and to how you think of responsibility. And I hope that these kinds of conversations give you a sense of, it's more than confidence. It's a sense that you can be even greater. You have this privilege of having that foundation from being a P&Ger that others don't share. So I would just offer, just realize you've already got some special sauce, some secret sauce, because you started and had time at P&G, and not everyone else has that experience.
This is so true.
I would add a little bit to that, Niki, that one thing I've come to appreciate over time is that sometimes the most complicated problems at their core, they have the essence of the solution is simple. The noise around it is overwhelming. It gets us thinking the answers have to be so complicated, but at its core, like today we talked about, it's the people. It's the ability to unlock them. It's not, you know, a 50,000 line item program. It is about empower the people, and they can do so much, right? So don't get caught up in the crazy complexity at times. Like settle, like we said, be grounded, and what's really happening, right? And then I just believe in this idea. There's so much possibility out there, and it's within each of us to go get it. And as a person who turned 50 during the pandemic and unfortunately passed another birthday during the last part of the pandemic, I got to a point, it might have started a few years ago, but I remember thinking, if not me, then who? Like, who am I looking to do this? And I say that because, Kathy, as you say about all the alum out there, if you are younger than me and earlier in your career, it took me a while, I think, to realize, if not me, then who? Who's going to get this done, right? And so the power to believe that you can have that impact and change and start acting with that purposeful intent, I think we could move many mountains. So thank you again for having all of us. This was fun. I also want to become a new P&G sort of, I guess, alum emeritus to maybe come back in the future. But thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you.